Testing.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to allow just a couple more minutes in case people are having trouble parking or arriving. So appreciate everybody who's here on time. So I'm going to start maybe about 3 minutes after. I didn't mean to kill all conversation. I meant to kill that conversation. Yeah. Okay, now that John's here, we can start. Welcome, everybody. Um, this is our a workshop that we've had in the works for a little bit. I sent out an email about a couple months ago saying I wanted to engage the community better about some of the challenges we're facing with community development. So the purpose of this is both an update and a workshop to hear your feedback on various things we're going to kick around with you. Welcome. Come on in. There's still room. I don't want to talk at you too much, so we do have a bit of a PowerPoint, but we're hopefully going to get through that fairly quickly. And the last, so a significant amount of the meeting is a dialogue, because I do want this to be informal and conversational, which is why we're sitting down here. We're mic'd because we're taping this so that folks could see this at home. So I'm going to start by introducing folks. I'm Dave Kiff. I'm the city manager. This is David Contreras, our community development director. Megan Garibaldi and Jane Abzug from BB&K. They're with the city attorney's office. There's a couple of more folks in the chambers I'd like to introduce. Wendy, Anthony, and Matt from community development. I see Councilmember Whalen, Councilmember Orgill here. Appreciate your being here. They're on the ad hoc committee that's kind of looking at this issue with us. So we need to be careful that we're not creating a council meeting. We haven't done that yet. So just the two of them can be here. And then I appreciate other members. I see a couple of folks from DRB and Heritage. It's good to see you here too. We're going to cover the backlog, the application backlog, and some of the issues covering it, along with some data. We're going to cover what we think are some of the solutions and action steps, and they're both people-related and process-related. And then we're going to dive in more about some of those process improvements because we want your feedback on them. We're going to talk about EnerGov, which is digital submissions. We're going to talk about a pending overhaul of the whole zoning code. And we're going to focus with you this afternoon, too. Jane's going to run through this, some elements of design review that might be able to be changed without losing the spirit of design review. And then at the end, I'm going to talk just a couple slides about historic properties because they're all tied in. I'm going to hand it over to David next. I can run the slides.
Beautiful. Good afternoon. I'm David Contreras, Community Development Director. I'll start off with this slide here with respect to what is the current backlog. And just to briefly just summarize this slide, there are a lot of numbers on this slide, a lot of rows and columns. 6 weeks ago, we developed a new process for tracking the projects that were in the pipeline. These are projects that many of you have been working with staff on. And so this table identifies categories for tracking both the non-ADU projects and the ADU projects that you've been working on with us. It also tracks the staff report preparation and where the staff reports are with respect to their review type. And so as you can see during the week of August 19th, when we started this process, there were approximately 78 projects that had not completed a review. These were projects that were in what we're calling the backlog category. And so as you can see now, moving towards the right side of the table into this week, that number is substantially down. We're at about 45 projects that are still pending their first review. So the needle is moving in the right direction. And I won't go through all the details of this table, but as you can see down at the bottom right, that includes how we're tracking the staff report review at the various levels, whether it's being prepared by the staff planner or it's under review by a manager or the project is ready to go.
Next slide,
Mm-hmm. So with respect to the backlog, and David has communicated in several emails to the community, and many of you are probably thinking, what is this backlog that David is referring to? So the backlog was caused for two main reasons, as we've identified over the past several months, and looking at both the process and also the people. Now, with respect to the people, and as we identified here, those reasons include having a high number of staff turnover, especially over the past year, and then having to hire and train the new staff to replace those staff. With respect to the accountability, this is something that I personally have been hearing about over the past 3 months from property owners, architects, business owners who have not received either phone calls or emails back to them. So I can attest in hearing you that the accountability was limited. It's been limited, and it's something that we're addressing. The other reason is tough customer interactions, which caused many of our staff to leave. These were interactions that occurred in person at the counter, via email, phone calls, and ultimately some of those staff members felt compelled that they needed to find employment somewhere else. With respect to the process and those reasons, this includes, as many of you know, a very complex municipal code to learn and to implement and use, especially for the staff. Design review triggers that have resulted in unnecessarily bureaucratic process. As many of you architects and designers have approached me and asking the question of, why does my small deck addition need to go through a DR process? And then having to add more details into staff reports. And not just the staff reports, but also having to bolster resolutions and findings that provide that overall stability and protection of your project moving through the process. Now, with respect to addressing, again, I talked about the two reasons. We have the people reasons and we have the process reasons. So this slide is identifying the people reasons. So to address the people reasons, we will be implementing additional training for the new staff with respect to CEQA, permit streamlining, and correctly using the city's municipal code and implementing the city's municipal code. We've implemented a new team system that has the most experienced planners as team leads serving as mentors. And this is across the board. This translates to more accountability and transparency with respect to how the projects are tracked individually with each planner and then on a weekly basis across a division. We've limited telecommuting to 1 day per week while still trying to be a good place to work. Addressing the process reasons. We've hired retired annuitants to help process backlog projects. These are staff members who previously worked in the city and who understand the city's policies, the city's municipal code, and understand the city's urgency to move projects through the process. We're in the process of hiring additional limited term staff to again help us move the needle even further. We're reviewing the staff report templates that we currently use to make it more efficient and quick for staff to prepare and present staff reports. And we're also asking architects and designers to pitch in, especially to provide staff with the justifications for how a project complies with the design review criteria. We're building the EnerGov system to help facilitate the online submittals of projects. The proposed comprehensive zoning code update you've heard about, this feature will also help move projects through the process much quicker. With respect to the proposed design review efficiency improvements, which you'll hear more about later, this will also help with the backlog that we have. Now, just a high level with respect to EnerGov, this will allow for digital submission of plans and to allow architects and designers to know exactly where their project is in the review process. So aside from allowing the digital submission virtually from their office, it will also allow those folks to also track the project and see where it is in the process. And so between October and November of this year, we will be piloting new projects with architects and designers to test the system. We're encouraging residents to also enroll in EnerGov, and we're moving all application submittals to EnerGov, and this is for all new submittals. And in 2025, we'll be moving all of our existing applications to EnerGov. So a few slides ago, I mentioned the comprehensive zoning code update. On October 8th of this year, the City Council will consider a vendor agreement that will begin a 24-month process to review the zoning code and to modernize it and to look for ways to facilitate improvements while at the same time ensuring that the update is compliant with state law. With respect to the process that we're going to go through, aside from the commission and council process, it's also going to require coastal commission review and approval. A full public engagement process will be held, which will comprise of the initiation of meetings with the City Council Ad Hoc Committee. The Ad Hoc Committee is comprised of council members Whalen and Orgill. Then it will be followed by various public workshops, a full environmental analysis, presentation to the Design Review Board and Planning Commission, public hearings at City Council, again, Coastal Commission review, and then returning back to the City Council if the Coastal Commission changes the document in any form.
Thanks, David. The next part of our discussion is going to get into some of the design review efficiency improvements, and here's where I do want definitely your eyes and ears and some input as we finish up. Our presentation isn't that much longer, but I'm going to hand this over to Jane. But firstly, I just want to go through the why of the design review efficiency improvement proposals. These are just proposals. We do think it's a short-term solution to assist with the backlog that doesn't jeopardize the concept of design review. State law and other codes have changed, and we need to reflect that. The intricacy of the process, we think, hinders productivity and has kind of pitfalls in there. After several years of field experience, it's probably time to look at the things that trigger design review. And these come about because the staff here has identified very thoughtfully some tools that we think are designed to keep the design review spirit, but also avoid some of those pitfalls and make the process faster. And with that, I'm going to hand that over to Jane.
Hello, my name is Jane Abzug. I'm Deputy City Attorney here, and today I'm going to talk with you all about the Design Review Efficiency Improvement Ordinance. The changes really can be broken into 4 buckets. The first bucket is made up of common practices that are not explicitly within the code currently, and so we want to codify agreed upon staff interpretations to make it transparent to the public and easy to process applications. The second bucket would be modifications to the triggers for design review. And as Dave Kiff, pointed out, this is really meant to address the head shakers. Really, this requires design review. It's always hard from the city attorney's office perspective and also staff's perspective to say, yes, that very minor project requires a full-blown hearing before the design review board and the planning commission. So we are going to try and modify those triggers. The third bucket is made up of modifications to the actual criteria and findings for design review. So here we're really trying to protect the spirit and intent of the design review ordinance because it's very clear that the community and public officials of Laguna Beach throughout its history have spent a lot of time developing those standards. But we do want to try and find a way to make it easier for staff to generate staff reports and the commission and board to be able to make the appropriate findings. And then the fourth bucket would just be, standard cleanup changes, removing duplication and errors that have developed in the code over periods of time. So I'm going to go through each of those buckets in a little bit more detail. So for common practices not within the code, we've identified that the code is missing some important definitions that have resulted in ambiguity and confusion when city staff and members of the public are trying to process applications. So for example, one design review trigger depends on whether a project results in a style change, and that's undefined in the code. It's hard to process, so we're proposing actual objective criteria that city staff and members of the public can apply to identify whether that trigger is met. And another example is various types of projects in the city will require a coastal development permit, but not require a design review ordinance, a design review permit. Currently, we have a called out procedure for staking in the design review context, but it's not called out in our coastal development permit context. This community development director has the authority through the application process to require information that is necessary for purposes of evaluating a development project. So we do require staking in certain circumstances when it's necessary to evaluate development. So that's another example of something that we're going to explicitly make clear in the code so that members of the public understand that there is the potential for a project to be staked. And this has come up a lot in the context of accessory dwelling units in the city, because those don't require design review, but they do require a coastal development permit. Lastly, and I think most importantly for this bucket, as most of you, and I'm sure all of you know, design review, there's the category that requires review by the Design Review Board and Planning Commission. There's also the review that is done administratively by Community Development Director Designee. And then there's a category that is called exempt. This really, I think, is somewhat of a misnomer that leads to confusion, because although certain projects are exempt from design review, they're not exempt from planning division review. And so it's important that this process is very, that it's highlighted in the code, so that not only staff is reminded that they need to be taking in applications and plans for exempt projects, but also that members of the public who are submitting projects also are aware of this requirement. This, we think, will help the city with its record management also, because it will force the city to keep track of these types of projects in a clearer fashion. The second bucket of big changes would be the design review triggers. And from a big picture perspective, setting the stage, currently every project essentially in the city requires design review before the Design Review Board or the Planning Commission, unless it's exempted out or it's accepted out. And so if it's not specifically exempted or accepted, what happens is you have some smaller types of projects that get thrown back into design review before the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission. So what we aim to do is try to specifically delineate the types of project that we want Design Review Board and Planning Commission review of, the projects that the city really cares about. So the scope of the DRB and Planning Commission review will actually decrease and be more focused on the bigger projects. And then the scope of administrative design review will increase, and the scope of the zone clearance or exempt will also increase. And then if the type of project is not covered within those three types of review, it's not subject to city regulation. So we're trying to make it more clear what the city is regulating and what it is not, so that everybody can be on the same page. And obviously we wanted to have this public meeting to get the public's input, because the public is a huge stakeholder in this process. So with respect to the review that will remain with the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission, we currently in the city have all public works projects, for example, go to the Planning Commission. There's no differentiating between major public works projects and minor public works projects. This results in some burden on staff that every project must go to the Planning Commission. So we're trying to break it down into major public works projects will go to the Planning Commission, but minor public works projects will go to administrative design review. And then we're creating another classification of de minimis public works projects, which would be, feasibility studies and things like that. And so we're trying to, again, be more specific about what goes to the Planning Commission and what goes to the administrative design review. Another component of these new triggers would be major changes to historic resources as differentiated from minor changes to historic resources. Minor would be replacement of windows and doors, additions to a first floor porches and decks, replacement of roof materials or building siding, minor site or building alterations, provided that any such alteration has been reviewed for conformance with the Secretary of Interior standards. And if it's not a minor modification to a historic resource, which would be administrative design review, it would be back in the bucket of review by the Design Review Board and Planning Commission. We're going to talk about historic resources and in more detail later, but this design review efficiency ordinance also is meant to better protect and establish more process for modifications to historic resources, so that will be discussed later. And then for clarified triggers, this is kind of a mix of the first bucket and the second bucket because we're relying on some of the new additions of definitions to clarify some of the triggers. Based on conversations with staff, it seems like there are certain things that the community really cares about. Of course, anything that would affect view equity. So we're clarifying some of the triggers that any improvement, which is more broadly defined, that exceeds 16 feet, that would trigger review by the Design Review Board or Planning Commission. Same thing with any new building. This wouldn't apply to ADUs and SB9 units. And then any major remodel would also be subject to design review and Planning Commission approval. And this term is now defined in the proposed ordinance, which is in conformance with the policy that the city currently uses. Lastly, there's some removed triggers, which are really just meant to help with the backlog. For example, the city has like a very robust sign ordinance. The Design Review Board and the Planning Commission, when they get a sign application, there's not much design authority on that application because it is so regulated in the sign ordinance. So it doesn't make sense to require all of that process to go before the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission when it's already just regulated by the zoning ordinance. The triggers for administrative design review, like I mentioned, are expanded. This option will also allow the community development director to send out notice to the community about the project and give the community the option to request a public hearing. And if there is one request for a public hearing, the public hearing will be held. This is meant to address certain projects that are minor in nature that neighbors don't really have any objection to. They'll get the notice, they'll understand the plans. Do they want a public hearing or not? They just submit it to the city if they do, and then the public hearing will be held. This type of review, like I mentioned, will be available for the minor capital improvement projects. Exterior facade changes that do result in a style change as defined. Certain landscaping. This was thought through by members of the Community Development Department that landscaping that's within the buildable area of the lot that exceeds 16 feet, so also getting into the world of view equity, that would trigger administrative design review. And if the landscaping is above 6 feet in the rear or side yard and above 4 feet in the front yard, then it would also trigger administrative design review. If the landscaping is under any of those limits, it's just subject to zone clearance. And so a member of the public would bring in their application, identify their landscaping, the city would have a record of it, and it would be processed. Other clarifications to administrative design review would be decks, slabs, or patios elevated higher than 3 feet. Those go to administrative design review. We don't really need, or at least we don't think we need, the Design Review Board or Planning Commission weighing in on those. And if it's less than 3 feet, it goes to zone clearance. Then for administrative design review, re-roofing of buildings that change the roof pitch or the roof dimension or square footage or results in a white or light covered roof, that would also be subject to administrative design review. Lastly, telecom facilities and above ground utility structures. We've moved this to administrative design review because ultimately these are highly dependent upon an expert report from the utility companies as to where it's feasible. But nevertheless, if the community wants to weigh in on where those are located, in front of which house, a public hearing can be had. Now on to exempt or zone clearance. This is really reserved for, certain de minimis public works projects, the inverse of some administrative design review projects. But really, I think the biggest change here that I think I'm most excited about is the option, and I think staff too, and probably many of you, is the ability to do subsequent modifications to a permit without having to go back through the design review and planning commission process. This is usually a very standard process in cities' municipal codes that allows some flexibility and allows the city to solve problems that arise during development that doesn't require the applicant to go through the whole process all over again. So it delineates when certain types of changes can be made, but it's also regulated by certain findings. So, for example, for minor modifications to an approved project, the community development director could make a minor modification if there was a finding that it was consistent with the code requirements, that it doesn't affect the CEQA findings, it doesn't affect the findings for the permits, it doesn't result in an expansion of the project in terms of use, and the changes do not relate to a feature that was specifically addressed by the reviewing authority as a basis for the approval. So as you can tell by the findings, these are very minor changes that can be made by the community development director that's really meant to allow the city to achieve compliance with the permits while making sure that the intent of the original reviewing body is still met. The third bucket is talking about the criteria and findings of design review. So as you know, design review currently is made up of 3 findings. One finding is made up of 16 criteria. It's very clear that the development of the findings and the criteria have been developed with a lot of community input, a lot of thought by the public officials. Additionally, the guidelines that support those criteria are very well laid out and instructive on how to achieve design. The issue that has been facing the city is that it's very difficult for staff to address 16 criteria and 3 findings, and then also in various specific plans address 6 or more other separate findings. So everyone has really come together on the city team to think of ways that we could provide flexibility to the decision-making bodies when they're at public hearings and acting on a project, and also provide staff with some relief on preparing the staff reports and the findings so that we can start moving projects and get through the backlog. Sometimes the intricacy of the 16 criteria leads to bureaucratic errors that result in continuances and delay. And then also some of the criteria, relating to sustainability, signs, public art, historic preservation, those are addressed through their own ordinances in the municipal code. And so really all of those criteria can be lumped into one finding, which is compliance with the zoning code. So we're trying to address all of the criteria, but group them and consolidate them into less findings. And I think the next slide. And then bucket 4 is really made up of the miscellaneous cleanup changes. One big change is to remove the allowance for 3 public hearings upon certain findings. And the thought is that this will assist with reducing the number of staff reports that have to be prepared. It will reduce the number of plan revisions that staff has to manage. It'll reduce the number of meetings, it'll reduce the number of notices, and hopefully it will force the applicant to consider feedback from early neighborhood communication and the design review board or the planning commission earlier on in the process. The next change here would be to prohibit the resubmittal of an application for a similar project within 6 months as opposed to 2 months. This similarly will serve the same purpose of trying to get the applicant to take in the early neighborhood communication feedback and that of the reviewing body, so that, you know, if they don't and there is a denial, they will have to wait and until they resubmit. Another change is to remove the mandatory nature of the design review guidelines. Currently, there is a finding for design review that it is in conformance with the design review guidelines. As I mentioned, these guidelines are incredibly instructive and very good. They'll still be used, but it will not be a finding of compliance for purposes of approving a design review permit. This is really from the perspective of defensibility and also for staff to not, so that staff does not have to check off every objective design review standard in the guidelines to show that the project meets the design review criteria and findings. And I think that is it from me.
In your slide up there, first, I really appreciate Jane's work through this as well as Megan's and the staff's. I know it's a lot to absorb, so I imagine we're going to spend a lot of the conversation next when we're done with the presentation on those subjects. But so yeah, let us know what you think. The next steps for this would be to go to DRB and to Planning Commission with workshops, maybe in November, then go to council with another workshop. Again, not an action item, but probably into January, and the council would direct the next steps. I'm going to switch gears slightly now and talk about historic properties, and then we're almost done. And so just as a reminder of the issues here, we have a historic register. It requires the owner's consent and offers incentives to the property owners. And we need internally to make sure that the documentation, all the properties on the register have the right documentation. So one of our action steps is to review and organize that, possibly with a consultant. And then we're going to ask the consultant to develop and recommend a plan to address any anomalies. And again, this is just for the properties on the register. We also have an historic resources inventory, and as folks who've been here a while know, this was prepared in the 1980s with about 800 properties, along with their historic context. All of the codes references to the inventory were eliminated in 2022, but and we also may have evidence of historicity for the inventory and non-inventory properties across the city. So one of the things we need under CEQA is we need to determine each time a property should be treated as a historic resource based on substantial evidence, even if they are on the inventory, especially if they're on the inventory which doesn't exist anymore. And so we may need under CEQA to address each property's historic status. So the solution we're working on there is, again, we may have to use a consultant to do this, to decide how and if and when to assess the non-registered properties for historical significance. And then, if appropriate, conduct those assessments and then communicate those historicity findings to property owners and the public, allow the property owners and the public to respond, and then to file that information appropriately in the property files. The other thing that we're discussing doing is to actually hire a preservation planner qualified to address historic property issues, preservation issues, as those applications come in. We have some code change ideas as well. And then the longer term, we at the staff think that we need to do a review of the Heritage Committee's scope and duties to include a better work program for them, and then see if what it means to help them avoid duplicative and unnecessary processes. And that may mean forming a heritage commission, and that's a discussion we need to have with the council, that could take on design review for heritage properties. And then longer term also is to consider the preparation of a historic context statement. And lastly, I'm going to ask Jane to go through this one again. This is a kind of some of the maybe code changes possible for altering a historic property.
So this relates back to what was previously discussed as far as there being minor alterations to historic resources and then major alterations to historic resources. In this scenario, the city, well, currently under the city's code, the city can require a historic resource assessment be prepared at the cost of the city if it needs to determine whether or not a project is a historic resource. So that would be clarified in this ordinance to make it clear. And then in the context of when it is clear that a property is a historic resource, the applicant would be required to pay for the historic resource assessment as usual with an application. But either way, anytime there would be an alteration to a historic resource, there would be a public hearing process, whether it be before the administrative design review or through the DRB or Planning Commission.
That's the end of our presentation. Now's the time, again, we'd like to hear some feedback on any issue facing community development. That's why we're here. I did summarize a lot of design review elements, but also there's just general backlog ideas and suggestions and questions you may have. So we're all here, we're all ears. There's a microphone that Cassie will walk around because, again, we want to get your question on the feed. So, sure. Hand up first. Takes a minute for the mic to go on.
Testing.
Am I live? Okay. So 2 questions. One, is there a syllabus of the presentation that will be provided online that to which we could refer? Sure. And so with so many changes going from the Design Review Board to administrative reviews, how will noticing be handled with that? Will there still be the same noticing for neighbors to be able to know what's going on? And then just on the side on that, over the years we have, for commercial properties, because we basically have a 300-foot noticing requirement. But when there is a commercial property that's undergoing some review, there isn't a resident that is within necessarily 300 feet, but they would be affected, could be affected by what would be going on to that kind of a commercial property. So that's actually 2.5 questions. So thank you.
So currently, the way that items are noticed for administrative design review, it would remain the same. It hasn't been changed in the proposed ordinance as of yet. But there would be an additional process where the first notice you would get would be of the actual project and the opportunity to request a public hearing. And then if a public hearing is requested, you would get another notice about the actual date for the public hearing and community input.
Hi. I wonder, we had a program where the staff would come out to a project ahead of time before submittal, and I thought that was really helpful. Is that still happening? And would it continue to happen with your proposed changes? And it seems to me that the staff who's writing the staff report needs to see the properties. We had a case at DR where there were huge trees on the property, and the staff report said there was nothing of significance there. And you could even see it on the air photo. And so I'm not really impressed with the staff reports. They seem very standardized, and I don't get the feeling that they really have a feel for the project or the place. What happens with admin approval? It used to be that when you went to admin DR, and if anybody objected and it couldn't be resolved during the admin hearing, it would automatically go into DR. And what we've experienced more recently is we object and they approve it anyway. And then we have to appeal with a $2,000 fee. And that's pretty onerous. The thing about minor changes where windows, doors, and siding would not be reviewed is really the kiss of death for historic resources, because the significance of the historic resources is what you see from the outside. We can't even regulate what's inside. If you change all three of those things, you have ruined could be ruining the integrity of a historic resource. I'm also concerned about a generalized finding of compliance with DR. That means that all those individual things would not get the same degree of scrutiny as they do now, and we would lose some of those reviews, which are important. As it is now, it seems like many of them are very standardized, and they keep repeating the same things, that everything is okay, and some of it is really not okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jane.
I'll address the code components of the comments. There's currently nothing in the municipal code or the current proposed ordinance that requires a staff person to come to the property before accepting an application, but I can let Mr. Contreras comment on staff's participation in the application process after. Second, currently how administrative design review is handled would be that in the proposed ordinance at least would be that if a public hearing were requested, there would be a staff report, there would be notice, a hearing, staff report, public comment, deliberation by, correct, before the admin, for the community development director's designee. And then that decision can be appealed to the city council. I think the city recently addressed the fees of the appeals and potentially the option for waiver in certain circumstances, but I'll let David or Megan weigh in on that.
There is, in the event of, the council adopted a new policy relating to the waiver of fees in the event. There's two circumstances in which that could occur. One is if there's a staff error that needs to be addressed, and fees will be waived in order to appeal to and to have the opportunity for the appeal body to address the error. And then there's also, in the event of public interest, there's the ability to waive fees. And the public interest criteria needs to be actually the three of us, or our current positions, need to agree that the issue that is arisen in that scenario warrants a waiver of fees. And so there are scenarios in which the fees can be waived. The idea, I think, going back to the administrative design review process is that it is a public hearing and that it is an opportunity for evidence to be heard and weighed. That is, in fact, the whole idea of a public hearing generally, is that it's an evidentiary hearing. So whether that's before the design and administrative body, which would be the community development director or designee, or through design review, the purpose is to create a balance, is to provide the evidence. And in that scenario, the decision maker to take in that evidence and balance it. So it's creating that process. And so it's not intended to have a second step as part of that process. There is a decision maker at that hearing for that reason. And so that's the idea of quantifying or putting certain, trying to grow the administrative process, the administrative design review process, is to really take the burden off of the design review board, because they are so burdened currently by the city's code. And so this is an attempt at a balancing between those two, but the goal is not in any way to remove process from the public and to make sure that everyone has their opportunity to speak and be heard on every project that comes forward. I can let actually David speak to how the admin DRB process works. I think that might be helpful in understanding how that's developed sort of in greater detail. But I do think that, again, going back to the idea of a hearing, it is that person is supposed to be an independent, come in with an unbiased opinion and take in the evidence. And so it's an opportunity for neighbors, if they have concerns or objections, to raise them there and let that decision maker weigh those against the evidence that's presented by the project applicant. But I don't know if David has more to speak to on the process for admin DR.
Yeah, I would just add that it's correct. It's an unbiased process. So the hearing officer, if you will, is independent of the review that's happening on site by the project planner. But to step back and answer the question that you asked with respect to a formal process that you mentioned used to be here many years ago, a pre-application process. We currently don't have that type of process whereby a property owner or an applicant would submit a pre-application for residential projects where the planners would go out and visit the site. Currently, all of our planners are instructed to perform site visits prior to the DRB hearings on each specific project. And oftentimes they meet with the homeowners and also with the project architects of record.
Somebody want to talk to Ann's comment about whether or not the minor changes to historic properties would gut our historic property?
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, and definitely what we're looking for when we're bringing this ordinance to the public is to get the type of input and the concerns, and that's something that can easily be addressed in the ordinance process. The goal of this ordinance with respect to historic resources is actually to create more process and procedure than currently exists. And so I think that it will be helpful to get some input probably from our historic preservationist consultant and members of the public on how to modify the ordinance to best protect historic resources. And just in response to the comment about consolidating the findings and the concern that it would make it a more cursory review, at least something that I've noticed with the number of 16 criteria, there does appear to be somewhat of a checklist approach, or there used to be a checklist approach with the criteria. There actually wasn't very much analysis on how the criteria were met. And so the goal actually with creating the 7 findings is to make the analysis more robust and more detailed, and also to allow the decision-making bodies in the public hearing the opportunity to add conditions of approval to modify the project without requiring staff to go in and change all the criteria and the findings on the fly. And so really the goal of creating the 7 findings as opposed to the 16 criteria is really to make the analysis more robust, and so that members of the public understand why the grading on the project is the most environmentally sensitive, how the design of the project with respect to the location of the garage makes it most environmentally sensitive. So that's really the goal with including the 7 findings as opposed to the 16 criteria.
Yes, thank you. Chris Prelitz here. 2 questions. The first is legal review of many parts of the process. I know for my own project that I had going through, every time I wanted one small change or it had to go through the next process, it had to go to legal review, and that seemed to take months every time it happened. So I don't know if that process can be streamlined and maybe less items need to go through legal review. And the second is the planner continuity. So this project I have has been going on for like 5 years. It did have a property change, which had to be resubmitted, but I've had 5 different planners. Anthony was fantastic for the last part getting through zoning. And then 2 weeks prior to DRB, I was issued a new planner. I have to bring them up to speed on the whole project, and they have to get educated on it. That doesn't seem to help the process on your end at all. So the thought of a planner continuity for a project seems to make sense on my end.
With respect to legal review, the goal is actually to remove the legal review. The goal is to have the planners do the staff reports, do the process, and to just consult with the city attorney's office to the extent that's necessary, because there are tricky parts to the project, or there's a code interpretation that needs to be fleshed out, whatever. That is really the goal that we are working towards. There are projects that by nature have complex legal review, and when that happens, there is just a greater process that's involved. Our goal in reviewing projects from a legal perspective is to eliminate the legal questions so that the project is defensible going forward, so that there isn't question after the fact. And one of the things we tried to do in doing that review and then working with staff, sort of as we've been working with staff for the last year and creating a more robust staff report and more robust findings, is to create a better record for the city, so that when there are questions that arise 5 or 10 years down the road, we can look to the file and say, oh, this was what was intended, this is the answer, and have a well-documented file. And so we worked a lot with staff, and we have been having staff do a lot more of, we actually don't have a lot of staff of legal review on staff reports, but I think that there was a time where that was happening. And I also think that the goal really is for the benefit of the community, the benefit of neighbors, so that everyone has a clear understanding of the approved project and how it's going to move forward and be developed. And then if there are questions later, that's resolved. There's an easy resolution, and then it doesn't then take 6 months of legal review to figure it out.
Can I go back to your question with respect to the comment that you made about planners leaving, projects being reassigned? That's something that, yes, it's true. It's something that was happening with the number of staff that left last year, early this year. Many of those projects and big projects were having to be reassigned to new planners. We also have another layer because of the backlog, we pulled some of those projects out and assigned them to more senior staff, so that those senior staff could move those projects much quicker through the process. But I do hear your concern. I've heard it from many property owners and architects along the same line.
City Manager Dave Kiff and honorable members of the panel. My name is Alex Linton. I reside on Ocean Way together with my wife. First of all, Mr. Kiff, welcome to Laguna Beach. We're glad you're here. And thank you. And thank you for taking on this complex, difficult, and important topic. I'm going to say it's going to be one of your most challenging topics while you're city manager, simply because of the very engaged and informed public here in Laguna Beach, and the fact that this topic touches so many of us, either directly and indirectly. By way of background, we lived at a historic property before we bought the property on Ocean Way, remodeled it, got DRB approval first go around, and stuck by everything that DRB told us to do. I have listened to what you said about people and process, and want to offer a point of view on whether those proposed improvements are enough, and whether they really see what really happens to all of us who try to build in Laguna Beach or just remodel. Now, please know, before I start saying what I'm going to say, I don't have any intention of doing another project. So I'm saying this. I'm saying this simply for the benefit of shedding light of what it's really like to go through the process. So let me start with your people topic. Maybe there was something missing that I hope you're going to take a look at, and that is staffing levels. The response times that we got for all the stages of permits that we needed were appalling. And I say that with all respect. I myself run an organization with 1,100 people under public scrutiny all the time from the federal government and from the public. I know how difficult it is. But the time it took to get answers is hard to understand. From the time we got DRB approval to the time we had the permit to actually start building took a year. Why? I think all the people I talked to, I will tell you, I do like to engage with people. I found them competent. I found them helpful. It has nothing to do with, are they qualified? Are they doing the right thing? Do they have the right mindset? That's not what I experienced. They have so much on their plate. I think you're understaffed. It's a hypothesis. I have no insider information. But I do hope that by the time the city council meeting rolls around, you have taken a look at staff levels, will provide some benchmarks to other communities around, and report back on how we compare. How many requests do you get? How many people do you have? What's the workload for your staff? The second that I want to talk about is maybe in addition to people and process, there could be a third P. And the third P could be principles. I'd love to hear what your principles are, because I am not clear on them. And specifically, I want to refer to how much we paid for our remodel of a 2,300 square foot. It's not a Mac mansion. I'm absolutely against building this town out with Mac mansions. I think we have the right attitude, the right pride about the uniqueness of this town, and I know you share that, Mr. Kiff. We paid over $50,000 in fees to the city, having gone through DRB at the first fly-through and complying with everything they told us. I'm asking you, is that right? On our very street, there are two things that occur that rub me. The immediately neighboring project, 2060 Ocean Way, was purchased 6 months after I purchased my property. They started tearing walls down. They started taking windows out. They started digging trenches. I don't know what happened. There's lots of rumors flying around, but I don't know what happened. For 4.5 years, this project has sat there. High school students smoking dope. I found a needle there. It's a huge eyesore on one of the most beautiful streets in Laguna Beach. And the fees to extend the permits to the person who owns the property and apparently doesn't want to do anything except let it sit there as an eyesore are hundreds of dollars. Shouldn't we reward those who stick to the process and honor our building codes and punish those who don't? And then I would look at the fee structure and maybe think about the next person who wants to build, not charging them $50,000 for a remodel in fees, but charging those who don't do what they promise to the city and to their neighbors. And the second thing that I will say, I'm sorry, am I past my time limit? Very rough communications manager at the city of Laguna Beach. This is, for full disclosure, this is my wife, so I'm allowed to say that. Yeah, so she was very hesitant handing me the microphone. The other occurrence that we have on Ocean Way is there's a building that was sold on the other side of the street, ocean facing, just recently. No building permits issued, and they start building. What do you do about that? Everybody who lives here knows that people kind of say now, well, that's the default way, until somebody stops you from the city. City only takes notice when somebody reports it. What are those people paying when they break the code, don't follow? I follow it, I pay $50,000 plus. Those people don't follow it. You issue a stop work order. What's the fine? What's the fine the second time? Are you escalating it to the point where it gets to $50,000? I think your principles need to be reviewed so that you address those issues. Because if you live here for a while, such as we did, you will know people in this room, you will know people in this community who have experienced both of those issues that I just described. And I don't feel like in your people and process improvement suggestions, either one are covered. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, and thank you for all the effort you guys are putting in. Unfortunately, you don't have the benefit of watching this and being involved in it for the last 50 years like I have. So after attending over 500 design review or planning commission meetings, I'm fully aware of what you're up against. The process you're talking about changing and simplifying and streamlining, having to go back to the Coastal Commission, maybe changing the code and the elements, those are long-term, heavily involved, labor-intensive. That's not going to change the backlog issue that's occurring right now. The one thing I heard from David that was encouraging was this mentoring and breaking up of staff into segments so that you could have somebody with more education that could teach the newcomers the code. This code hasn't changed in the last 25 years, but 25 years ago, we had half the staff and we didn't have these problems. Wasn't easy, but we didn't have this kind of a backlog. Now granted, pandemic and the influx of money into this town has probably doubled the construction applications, and now we have ADUs, and now, as the gentleman said in the back, we have code enforcement that has really ratcheted up the issues. So I think education's important. I like the mentoring idea. I like bringing back a couple of staff people if they're willing to help. I think working from home doesn't work here. I hope that you can discourage that in the future. What we saw here years ago was the synergy of interaction between the planning members so that no matter which planner you spoke to, he was semi-aware of the other staff person's project and they could interface and help you solve problems. We didn't hear the complaints from applicants like we're hearing today. Enforcement, although fully staffed, I think is lacking. I don't know what it's going to take. Maybe there needs to be a building educated building inspector with code enforcement to address the kind of situations that the gentleman in the back talked about. My wife and I walk Rimrock Canyon almost every night. We've watched a project under construction for the last 5 years, and it probably has another year to go, and it's being done so slowly. It's just a bit of a nuisance to the neighborhood. Probably by now their permits have expired, whether they've reapplied or not, or what the penalties are. If not, there should be. I think that wraps up my comments. So I like the education idea, and I think that would be most easily implemented, quickly implemented, to make the process go quicker with this backlog. Thank you.
So I've got a very good understanding of zoning code after 25 years doing this, and my clients approach me and hire me for advice and guidance to get them through the process. I take them through that in all confidence. I go through plan check, I go through check after check, and then all of a sudden, a code is interpreted differently. Now all of a sudden what I'm doing isn't allowed. For example, I have a project that is, this is not just me. I have a project that's been going in the zoning process for probably at least 8 months. It's now been about an inch away, if you will, cleared for the building department. It has an ADU. It has an ADU deck. Okay, the deck is going to need admin design review. The and then the rest of the stuff. So all of a sudden, an ADU gets counted for lot coverage. It absolutely killed the entire project after 8 months. My client has paid me tens of thousands of dollars in good faith, and now he's very upset, and I am very upset. I want to know how zoning has the ability to do that. As we know, we're clear to the building department. It's almost January of a code change. We submit the plans to the building department in all good faith that the previous codes will be honored. They don't change them in midstream. Please tell me how zoning or the city or whatever has the right or the ability to do that. I have other projects that are under construction that could have possibly killed those projects too. I'm not going to tell you the addresses. But it's too late because they're under construction. Had this particular project I'm referring to been processed in a timely manner as prescribed by the law, it wouldn't have come up against this. It would have been permitted months and months and months ago. Under construction, this would have never came up. Can you please answer me now how this is possible?
David wants to chime in too. I'd have to look at that case specifically. Yeah. Well, as you were saying, what you were saying, I saw a lot of heads nodding. So it's a fairly common experience, it sounds like, or at least common in this room, which is probably why people are here. I don't know if David, you had any thoughts on it?
So my only question right now, again, not having you disclose the address of the property or the ownership, but you mentioned you're in building plan check.
I'll tell you the address of this particular one because it is now stuck with the part.
You don't have to. That's okay. But in terms of the process, you're in the building permit process?
No, I'm in zoning this far away from being cleared.
Oh, I see.
And all of a sudden the policy changed, and now the project's dead. And my client, for one, wants to know who's going to pay it back.
So I would say on that specific case, go ahead and reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information after, and we can take a look at that specific project. Great. Thank you.
I don't know where he lives. So don't worry.
All right, ready to go up? Yeah, go ahead if you can, but we need to give you a mic. Oh, sorry, back there. I'm sorry.
Mine's very specific about a re-roof. I wrote to you
Yeah.
regarding my problem.
Re-roof.
A re-roof.
Yeah.
Back in 1997, when we re-roofed from a shingle roof to a metal roof, I was able to do it at the counter with the contractor. No problems. They signed off, got a permit. Today, my contractor on August 20th submitted an application. We can't afford a new metal roof because ours has failed, so we are putting on a shingle roof, which this house was originally built with. Now I'm told because it's not the same style or the same color, Even though everybody in my neighborhood has a shingle roof, I'm being penalized, and we don't know how long it's going to go through design review. It's going to be whoever is handling this project is taking it to there's notification that's going to happen, and a $2,500 charge for a re-roof for a design review to sign off on that. We have 2 skylights that are going to be reduced to 1 because part of it is part of the failure with our current roof. So please explain to me what used to be approved right at the counter is now taking months.
Well, that's what I'd call a head shaker, because I do think, and this would be up to the workshop process and ultimately the council, it seems like our re-roof process is a little bit onerous. And especially it sounds like the first way it wasn't followed correctly, or maybe the code was different at the time. And then the second way, we're catching it and following it correctly, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense because you're going back to what you had before. That's just my own opinion. But we would need to look at changing the code to allow something like that to happen again. But I'm sure there might be some in this room in the community who would say, well, no, this is a thoughtful part of the design review process related to roofs. But and again, my own opinion, it's a head shaker. I don't know if Jane or Megan, we don't know the specific instance of this one, but whether it was approved incorrectly the first time and then caught the second time you're redoing it. Either way, it doesn't make good sense. My own opinion, sorry. I wish we could go through it faster for you.
I share that woman's pain. I applied for a new roof in February. We have not been approved yet. It's going through design review. It's no extra square footage, same color. And I find other people who have changed their roof and gotten it done with an administrative review. So I don't know where the judgment is that requires some to do an administrative and others to do design review. But I'm just making a comment. I do have a question. I don't want to put Megan and Jane on the hot seat, but I didn't feel like you completely answered Chris Prelitz's question about legal review of every single staff report, because this happened, I believe, was mandated by the previous the interim city manager, correct?
I think so. There's a bit of I think that's not accurate. Ultimately, there is not legal review of every single staff report. In fact, right now there's almost no legal review of any staff report. And back when the interim city manager was here, there was a period where we were reviewing, I would say maybe like 30 to 40% of staff reports. What our office has done instead, our goal is to create a better record really for you as the homeowner, so that when questions come up later about your project, it's very clear what your approvals are, and there's not a long process on the back end or we try to avoid going back to hearing to cleaning ups and whatever. So anyways, for the legal review, really the goal was to create templates. So we have created more robust templates for staff reports and resolutions, and we have focused on that effort. So I think, to be honest, I don't exactly know where I heard that too at one point.
It's been going around.
Yeah,
and
we would be
people have been
very busy
saying
if that were
everything
true.
needs to be staff reviewed or legal reviewed, and it's adding months and months to the approval process.
Yeah, I have heard that also, and it's not accurate.
So it's not true.
It's not happening. We are very, very busy, but that would just it would come to a complete standstill, to be honest, if that's what happened. Jane is incredibly involved with the community development department. She works a lot with the department, but really we don't have that level of review. And so I think I do think when we came on board about a year ago, when we were started coming to DRB and planning commission meetings, there were some instances where we noticed something that required a continuance, and so some of that happened, and that might have contributed to that narrative. But it's not a true narrative, and I am sorry that it's out there because I do think it's causing frustration for a lot of people. Yeah.
Hi, it's Stephen K. Munn from 1158 Catalina. We've been in Laguna for about 25 years and done numerous rebuilds of homes and buildings. And for quite a while, well, I think initially we learned to look, just make your design within zoning guidelines, talk to your neighbors first, and then submit, let plan check go through, and then meet with the planner and make the changes they ask for, and then resubmit. And it was about a 3-month process, and if you had to go to DRB, you went to DRB. So we're currently 15 months into a project that was submitted once, came out with a couple of comments. So we sat down with the planner, made those changes, resubmitted, got a new planner, came back with pages of comments, sat down with that planner, made those changes, resubmitted, and now we're in this backlog that isn't moving. So we ask two things. One is, please provide the resource necessary to get rid of this backlog and show it in more evidence, because our project is not moving. I mean, we check every month. It's exactly where it was 3 months ago. It's not moving. Secondly, how do we change the process so that if a planner says this is okay, that when you resubmit, you don't get evaluated by a different criteria and have to start over again? Because every time you've got to bring a surveyor out, somebody out to do another report and certify it costs money, it costs time, and it just doesn't work. So right now we're 15 months into it. We actually have no idea when we'll get out, and if we'll get out, having submitted what the planner asked us to, we won't be at the criteria of a different planner with a new set of questions. We're not suggesting any one of those planners is right or wrong, but if a planner says you're good with this, that should be good. Thank you.
Hi, I'm just going to say something brief. I kind of agree with what our senior architect in town, Morris, has been saying, but I want to add on to it. I'm catching up to you, Morris. I'm only 45 years here. You have a very, very healthy, robust resource that I want to really offer you to use. You have people that are in the trenches. You've heard from a few of them tonight, people that have worked here for many, many decades, seen codes come and go, what's changed, what's not changed. Mainly it stayed the same. But how the interpretation works with clients and how that is processed is by your design people in town, architects, engineers, builders, people that are in the field doing this. If you sat with people like this group and you said, I want to make this change, is this going to work or not work? Instantly, within a few minutes, you'd know whether it's going to make sense and why it hasn't changed over many, many years. I've recently heard many codes that have been in play and there's been no problem with them whatsoever have suddenly changed because, and no offense, the legal interpretation of that code desires to be changed. I think you want to look at the history of some of these codes when you're looking at them and say, did it work for many, many decades without problems at all? And should we change them or not? If it hasn't, if it's not broke, don't fix. You know, that's the kind of attitude I'm saying. That's just one piece of advice. I could talk all day about other things. I'll leave it to other people. But one other thing that we have not talked about at all, and that's that there is a need. We now don't have paper files, understand. As of 2020, they were thrown away or whatever, locked away. When you have a digital file, I want to be able to go to that file and say, what's going on? Literally, you can't do that. So the only way, if I have an issue with somebody down the street, this doesn't happen very often, but if I want to go look at that file, literally those things that are going on that project are not in that file on a regular basis. There is, I believe, something needed where you have a public transparency of what's going on projects. In the old days, you could go down and say, I want to know what's going on that project down the street, You know, it interests me, or somebody's asked questions about it. Here's the plans, go take a look. We can't do that. We don't have the transparency that we used to have. So if you are trying to follow projects, you can't get a hold of the planners. You don't know what's going on. You can go down to the city and wait, but we need a little better transparency. Thank you.
We're really hopeful that EnerGov is going to accomplish that transparency. That's what its purpose is. Yeah, it should all, if you look at what other cities have done with EnerGov, it has that kind of robust system where you can look at everything easily from your own laptop. I appreciate that comment, though.
Hello, thank you. James Henry. Wanted to cover a couple things. For those of you that are in City Hall, you'll see Greg in there more than me, and then probably me second. I have three things I wanted to talk about. Lance brought up one of the major ones is I think most communities change zoning ordinances in a specific way. And if they have interpretations or findings that are being made that are going to radically alter someone's ability to design something, that should be noticed and notified, and a date set that that's going to happen. And any submittals that happened ahead of that aren't subject to it. Because when you're stuck in zoning plan check for a year and the code has changed 3 times by the time you even get heard, that's impossible. You look like an idiot in terms of your clients. You know, I've been fired from a couple jobs because of how long things have taken, or I've been given different interpretations, and you should have known this. And I only work in this town, and I'm one of the younger guys in here, so I'm going to be here longer than any of you guys, and I'm going to be dealing with whatever gets set up over the next couple of years, hopefully for the next 25, and then I can be in Morris's shoes at some point. Hopefully, yeah, probably more than 25. One thing, I've written you guys this stuff, but there's some low-hanging fruit here that could be dealt with. When you hear Munn's commentary about corrections, he probably has some minor corrections, and he's been sitting there for 3 months waiting to get cleared to design review. That's insane to me. You know, your chart up here talks about initial zoning plan check as a big milestone, and it is. That's a small part of everything that happens inside to get to a building permit. When you have corrections that could be handled in a day or a week or even 2 weeks, rather than the 3 months that I'm typically seeing, those things, that can shorten the lifespan of a project within City Hall a lot. And then the internal reviews back and forth with the staff reports and the notices, I don't know if that's improved, but that's been an 8 to 10 week process most of the time, which is bonkers. That used to happen in a day or two. The other thing right now, I don't know if you're still running a 60-day appointment period, but you can't get an appointment right now. And I actually think that is illegal. You can't wait. I get signed up, I have a design, and I can't submit it until December. Like, that's crazy, right? Right now, there are no appointments available. You guys need to double that up, triple it up, do whatever. You don't even know what your backlog is in terms of how many projects need to come in. And then the piece of that is because no one can get through to design review, I was talking with Tom, they don't have any projects coming through. They should have 14 on their agenda. When's the last time we've had more than 6? It's been a long time, right? So those things, if you're trying to run a business in this town, it's crazy. You know, I tell my clients, I have no idea. When are we looking at building? I don't know. I have zero idea. I won't even tell them a date. So I would work on the appointments because I think that's an easy thing to do. And, you know, I think legal would tell you that I don't think you can tell someone they can't submit until next year just because you're behind. I don't know. And then in terms of what Lance was speaking to, policy decisions that are being made, I don't know how you guys are doing it, but there's been some interpretations with additional building setback. Lot coverage is a big one, being subject to DR or needing a variance. There are people in this room, like Ann Christoph was here when that was being decided upon. And, you know, I don't know the senior staff hasn't been here that long, and the people that haven't done a whole bunch of residential zoning plan checks. So you don't have the history based on why those decisions were made. And what Lance was pointing is to pool the resource so that we can all understand, why are we changing this? Because in my opinion, if we're going to look at lot coverage, the reason that's even written about not needing a variance is because they wrote it in there to give design review the discretion to be able to do that to protect a view. And everybody in here knows it. And I've done 5 or 10 projects that have used that over the years. And so to have that kind of a change, I have a project right now that's going to now need another variance because of this particular interpretation. And I'm not sure that everybody understands where that came from. And it would be good to know that history, and maybe you have some kind of roundtable. And if you're going to roll out a change like that, how do I know, after I've already been submitted in for zoning plan check, that this isn't going to be applied ex post facto to my project that was submitted 8 months ago? That's my comments.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for being here today. And what I especially appreciate is that you're coming to us with enough specificity so that we know the direction that you're planning to move in, but it's also not a done deal. So I think everyone here, whatever their thoughts about and frustrations about individual projects or multiple projects because they're architecture and design professionals, I think we all feel that we can really impact through our comments and our feedback what the final thing looks like. I think that, I mean, the devil will be in the details, but I very much appreciate what it is that you're putting forward. And I want to echo what a fellow resident said about the complexity and the challenge that all of you are facing. And I'm just very grateful to you for taking this on. I did have a couple of comments that I wanted to make. I wanted to echo Anne's concern about what might constitute a major or a minor alteration for historic resources, because if they lose enough integrity, they cease to be historic by almost any definition. And so I think that's something that, and I appreciated the response, that we'd be careful about what that means. I'm sure many of the architects in the room may feel differently about this, but I sort of liked the idea, pending other things being streamlined and made quicker, of having the applicant make a kind of case for how it conforms with the policies. And one thing that particularly comes to mind is that at present, size of a project is a really important part of compatibility, and yet there's no analysis of size. And I know other cities where you look at the properties within a certain radius, and the applicant will say, here's the size that we're dealing with and where that fits in. And I think that that would be useful information to have. I think if you're going to switch to a kind of hearing through objection or concern or request, that there should be a way to make notices for projects available more broadly to the public. As someone who's interested in potential impacts to historic resources, if I'm not within 300 feet, I'm not necessarily going to know. And our signs are very, very small. And sometimes they're at the back of the, you think you're at the front of the property, but it's a through lot and it's at the back. So maybe just once a month saying, here are the planning applications and where you think it might be. It would go to Planning Commission or Administrative Design Review or Design Review, just so the public has a sense of what's coming down the pike. One thing that you didn't mention, although it's come up in various questions, is this issue of variances, because one thing that's really struck me in looking at Design Review and Planning Commission projects is how many of them require variances. Like, it's a staggering number. And so if there's a way to kind of think about that, and maybe this relates to the issue that James Henry was raising about lot coverage, like if we want to think about that a different way. Like I didn't know what you were saying about, yeah, you can have more coverage because you're preserving a view, so you're not going up, you're going out, that maybe there's a way to think about that, because if there's still going to be lots of projects with variances, I assume that they're going to need some sort of hearing, and so the impacts of what you're talking about may be somewhat limited unless that works. I was a little concerned, and this is my last point, about the design guidelines there not being a finding of conformity, because I do think that the guidelines are kind of can be a misnomer, or that create a misunderstanding that they're just helpful suggestions and kind of touchy-feely, very fuzzy, and hard, way too subjective for anyone to make findings about. But I think it may be useful to review the guidelines to see, are there ones that we do think it's important for projects really to be in conformity with? And this will be especially important, of course, if Laguna is going to move more toward objective design guidelines, which I know the state is pushing. So those are my comments. And again, just thank you so much.
I have a question. It's completely different because I have nothing good to say about the planning department. So I was, because it's frustrating. Everything I've heard is the same as my frustration, and the clients think it's crazy. The time frames, and my last planner lost our emails and our plans for 4 months, and his telephone number went to a weather station, and I'm not joking. So it took forever to get attention, and for 4 months to even get a hello. So that was my experience recently. But I have a question about all the I know we're building a lot, the city's busy, but now we have the building department, which goes quite flawlessly and quickly, but then we get to, I'm calling for an inspection, and that's slowing up. So is there something happening with maybe we need more attention in the field too? Because when we call for inspections, do we need to have more inspectors? Because we need our 2-hour window, and we're not getting that. And that was my main question, is trickling down with what's going on with there's an imbalance between the planning and the building, which runs smoothly. And my question is about calling in for inspections as a contractor. And then I have one other question after that. I got a client that says they were historically registered by the state, which is independent from the city, and I don't know what they're talking about, but they said they got a letter, but it's not the city's historical registry. So I just wanted to know if you know anything about that.
Yeah, I can take the first one. With respect to inspections, I had not heard that we were having an inspection call-out issue, but I'd be happy to learn more about your specific project and the address. Okay. So if you can find me after. And with respect to the second part of that, Megan, I'm not aware of letters going out to property owners from the state that reference our properties.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. I don't know exactly what that is. We can take a look at it if it's related to your project and try to help ascertain what that is. I think that there are local and state levels of historic resources, but there would be a process involved. So it seems surprising you would get a letter out of the blue. So I'm not exactly sure what that is, but yeah.
I had 3 comments, and I got 4. I think early on you said that the process of the going through the code will be done by a vendor. I'm going to volunteer James and Morris. I hope you involve people like those into that process, because as you get here tonight, they get it. Number 2, I think early on one of the early comments was you want to work your way through the backlog. I think it's important that we separate temporary problems and permanent problems. I think James and Morris, touched on that a little bit too. I think, you need to match your solution with your problem. So I hope we don't come up with permanent solutions to temporary problems. Number 3, and this is, I call it the baby in the bathwater problem. Just, fundamentally, there's no question you need some streamlining and some efficiencies, but I'd certainly hate to see, the character and uniqueness of Laguna streamlined out of the process, streamlined out by this process. And then finally, the last comment is just, there's got to be a balance of property rights. I know this whole conversation is generally aimed at trying to expedite the process of people that are applying to make some changes to their home or build a home. But property rights go both ways. The community has property rights too. So once again, I just hope that we respect both sides, the applicant and the neighbors in the community as you go through the process. That's it.
Yeah, I'm just following on the previous comment about the inspections. I've been here for 32 years, and most notably since this last July when Will Yarborough retired and he hasn't been replaced, inspections have been a nightmare. There's just too many inspections for too little inspectors. We can't get times. I've been rolled over 2 days. And I did talk to Will. He didn't retire. He got a better job at another offer because he didn't last long here because of just everything that was going on here. You know, people are leaving because they're not getting paid enough. I've been told that by a few planners that went to another city. So I think this is more than just, like, there's some internal problems that you guys got to look at yourselves and spread the money around and keep these people here because they're good people. We're losing good people. And it's making our jobs as a contractors really tough right now. We have to schedule things in advance. If they don't show up for inspection, I've got to push my concrete back for a week. You know, things are not just getting done long enough. The owners are up in arms about why things are taking so long. I've never taken this long to build a house in my life in 32 years here. You know, and it was pretty good for a while, but now it's slowing down. And why? There's just not enough inspectors.
So good afternoon. My name is Matt Schneider, Assistant Director of Community Development. With regard to inspections, and this will touch a little bit on the last question. So we currently are offering AM and PM timeframes. So I know in the past there had been the 2-hour window. That isn't the current practice. That's something we can certainly look at as part of this process. We did lose one inspector in July, and it also happens to be vacation season, so there was a backlog, I would say, through August. But on average, our inspectors have 7 or 8 stops a day. Occasionally, we get, we can't predict how many inspections are going to be called in, but on a heavy day, that can be 10 or 11. We do occasionally need to roll over. That's not the norm. If you do run into a situation where it's rolled over, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is online. We try to avoid that in all circumstances. I will say we often find we get one inspection called in, the inspector goes out to the job site, and it's actually 3 or 4, and we try to accommodate that, and that slows down the whole process. We also get a number of people that call in the morning, and we try to add them on whenever we can as well. So it's a balancing act. Again, the average is like 7 or 8 inspections a day. And we're not rolling over. There are days when we do have to do it, and it's hard to right size when we can't predict the number of inspections that are going to come in. I'd say there was one day last week, I think we had 108 inspections called in. So that's a lot. That's the most since I've been here. But there's also days there's 60, right? So you have to balance it out, and it's tough. And I will say this week, I will apologize because we are behind. It's CALBO this week. A lot of our inspectors have to do mandatory state training to keep their license and certification, and we have posted that online that we're rolling over. But again, fully acknowledge in July and August we were down some days to 3 inspectors with 1 inspector leaving and vacations, and we're through that. And for the most part, we haven't seen rollovers. But if you have an issue, please reach out to me. Oh, and one last thing. With the new InterGov system, as we roll that out, you will be able to, through your InterGov account, schedule your inspections directly through that system. So it'll avoid having to email, and it'll also be the way to check the list every morning. So just FYI on that. That's an improvement, hopefully. Thanks.
My name is Gail Wade, and over 40 years of being in this town, owning a number of homes, 3 of them over 100 years old, 1 a build up from the ground. I would like to make some comments regarding the DR admin. I mean, everything I've heard today, I've heard over the years. I can remember sitting through many DR admins with Pat Kramer, who was essentially a permit aide. And so my concern is, and it's probably for Dave Kiff, is the staffing, because I'm worried that the people who are going to be doing are not going to be sufficiently trained or experienced to make the right decisions, on behalf of historic properties or for the applicant or for the neighbors. So one person for DR admin, I don't know if that's going to be enough. I think also looking at having people that may be on reserve that could be participants in that process for the city might be something to do. And then I'm worried about the real reason we're having such backlogs. Is it staff efficiencies? As a public person looking in, we've have so many more employees over the years, and it seems like less work's getting done. I wonder if that alternate Friday off is, if you look back in history, if that's created part of that. I always wondered why they couldn't have a skeleton crew or alternating people on Fridays there, or, getting things done on Fridays. That's, in the real world of the corporate world of business, we're Monday to Friday. For some of us, we're 7 days a week, but Monday to Friday is a work week. Why don't you provide for that? And, if also for inspectors are going to be out this week on training, that way in advance. Why haven't you done something to, plan for that? So I think staff efficiency, Dave, how are you doing on that is my question. And what about the Fridays?
Well, I do think without question that the reasons for the backlog, again, includes people issues, people and process, as we noted. And David and I talk about this a lot, what the solutions are. David's new to his position. I'm new to mine. I'm so thankful for the people who are here that have been here a long time, but we've lost a lot of people. This is a hard place to work. It's not just pay. As we said, it's a demanding code, a demanding process, demanding citizens. I'm one of them. I know what it's like to be on both sides of the counter, I think. And we're trying to make this a place where people are going to stay, so that kind of institutional knowledge will work and be transferred from one person to another or maintained with the same person. We've heard a lot of suggestions as to how to do that better tonight. They're not new suggestions to us. I appreciate them. That's a big challenge for me and David to make sure that we can improve the people side of this process. Whether that means something different on alternating Fridays, there's a labor negotiation involved in that, but I'm willing to unturn any stone. So I appreciate the thoughts.
And I'll say thank you for being here too, stepping up and trying to get out ahead of all this. Ryan Gear here, born in 1966 in South Laguna. As you implement EnerGov, I just did a little research on it, don't know about it too much, but my background is in data and architecture together, and I'm looking forward to being able to manage the process better. It looks like you can track that, and I think kind of looping that information back in through the team, showing that you're improving on times because you can track it now, I think will be super helpful for you, and if you can exhibit any of that back to us to show us that times are shortening because you're actually tracking it, I think that'll create a level of trust that we can come back into the system and do some business, because like my cousin James here just said, we can't get paid until we can submit a project, and right now we're out of business. So.
I'm going to circle back. Historical. There was mention of the old historical inventory that we worked so hard to get removed. Are you suggesting you're going to go back, resurrect that, and review each one of those projects?
The proposal is not to resurrect the inventory. There is there is a sort of hole in our current process. We have the register, and then we have applications that come in, and because the register does not necessarily include every potential historic resource in the city, we have to find a way to make sure that as projects come in that are historic resources for CEQA purposes, that those are properly evaluated. And so we're trying to discern a process, and there's a lot of talk about how to staff, and should we bring someone on that's, has historic experience to help with this? Do we need a consultant? But we want to plug the hole that we are experiencing, where a project or a property can go forward, and then there's evidence of historicity that comes up at the last minute that staff wasn't aware of. And we want to be able to address that so that it's not going to design review and we're learning of historicity, and we want that to be early in the process so that we're not changing everything at the last minute. Like, our goal is to really stop that from happening. I know that happens, and I've actually heard a lot tonight about moving goalposts, and really the goal is to stop the moving goalposts. That's what we're trying to do through this proposal. And so we're looking at all things, and one of the things we're looking at is not to resurrect the inventory, but to find a process so that we don't have historic resources sort of being pulled from agendas at the 11th hour because it wasn't evaluated in the beginning.
Hi, thank you all for being here. Clark Collins, just a quick request. I heard you talk about CEQA training for staff so that they make better decisions. Please include Heritage, Design Review, Planning Commission in that education. I know on Heritage we've requested that, for years. We had some, I've been on for 10 years, we had some CEQA training early on, and it's invaluable in making great decisions. So please include us in that. And then you talked about workshops, I think maybe when all this is done, for Planning Commission and Design Review. I'd say please, on the Heritage side, please include Heritage in that, just for the, the historic, the parts that touch historic, but that would be wonderful. Thanks.
That there's actually a council agenda item coming back on commission training, and so we can provide that feedback in that staff report.
Hi, everybody. Keith Lee. I've been doing architecture in town for 25 years. I get a lot of times I get new projects, and the clients, they moved to town, they bought a home, they paid top dollar for it, and they want to do a remodel, but they're in fear of going to design review. They hear horror stories, they think the city's the house of no. So I think there's a little bit of image work there and support from the city towards the residents to not make them feel in fear of having the home they want. They paid really good money for it, and they're willing to pay the money to do the remodel on it, but they shouldn't be discouraged from having their dream home if it's sensible. I'd like to see a little bit of effort looked at the nonconformities and variances. We're not in Irvine, we're not a planned community. Probably 50% of the homes in Lagunas don't fit the municipal code. So what? So I think if we have a little more, if we empower the planners perhaps with a little more discretion on nonconformities, let's say we have a darling little cottage and it was added on to, and it's legal nonconforming, and they want to change some siding in a little piece of the building that's outside, that's in the setback. All of a sudden they need a variance. They got to go to design review. They have to do sort of not sensible and overreaching steps compared to the scope of work, if that makes sense. So I think if we can empower the planners a little bit more to have some discretion on nonconformities and does it really require a variance, or that would be helpful. I think also we should look at how we define a major remodel. There's so many darling cottages that were built 100 years ago, and they need new siding, so you got to take the siding off. I don't think if you remove siding to do a nice work to a cottage that I have to add up all these demo calcs, and now it's a major remodel, and I have to go to design review because the home needs it. There's so many homes in Laguna that warrant the work. They need the work. The designs are sensible, and I just it just seems, I don't know, it seems like I guess a waste of time and money to drag the clients and the designers and architects through the lengthy process of something that seems sensible to the project or whatever the scope of work is. I guess that's it. I think rewriting the municipal code is going to be a long process, and I'm with Morris. I think you should bring in the architects and designers and people that are in the boots on the ground that have been through it all to help define what's important, what maybe we can push aside. I think that's all I have for now. Yeah. Thank you. And welcome, Dave.
Hey, Dave. Mayor Bauda, Empress Builders. I wanted to echo what Keith behind me said. I think it's highly important to understand that the 50% of the municipal code is not currently within the approved zoning code. So I don't know if there's anything that could be done there. It's definitely worth entertaining. And then also with what some of the earlier architects said, they had mentioned that obviously there's a character we're trying to uphold. And I think most of the people in this room want to do that. They want to abide by that character of that town that we're all searching to be part of. But I think there also needs to be a consideration about maybe a third process outside of the variance process, outside of DRB, outside of plan check. I think there needs to be a substantiation process that can occur. And I think that there are a lot of qualified architects in here that do a great job of being able to present the case to be like, hey, this house 2 doors down has this same detail feature and they're zoned at the exact same code. Why can't this house also have that same feature? I think it's fair. I think it's worth a consideration. And I also don't think it should go through the lengthy process of a variance, which takes time and money and sometimes gets a no. I think the variance should be considered based on something that's out of the norm, not something that can be substantiated. In a lot of cases, what we're getting is we're seeing that our variants are being substantiated, and it's taken 2 years to get that variance. It just seems like a bit dragged out. If we can make a third process that's strictly substantiation, then I think that there's possibilities that a lot of this will get speeded up, and I think that might solve some of the problems. So.
This may not completely fall under this meeting, but regarding historic, I don't know if you know that most all of the windows on the in the Villa Rockledge have been broken out by vandalism. And so those are all historic windows, and now they're starting on the roof. I don't know if the city can go take a look at it or supply extra security or police, but the house is being torn apart by vandals. So, and I don't even know if the homeowner even knows what's going on.
I have a couple of questions, and some of it's historic issues. If I'm in the process of building and somebody calls and complains that we're working on a historic property, when the property is not indeed historic, why should the burden of proof be on the owner and not the city? You have a historic registry, and it's not that hard to go on Google Earth and just go back a few years without having to spend the resources and having the owner, hire a legal team just to prove it's not, just because somebody said it was. That's one thing. The other is they were talking about having reports when a project is going through planning, and then a planner leaves and another comes back, and then it's kind of like starting from zero. It's kind of like calling customer service and having to repeat your same story to the person you were transferred to. A lot of times they say, if it's a customer service and it's regarding your account, they say, hold on, let me read the notes of the other person. Seems like that's not happening. There's no notes, there's nothing that a new planner can refer to get this project moving forward. And it's either by a recording that you can translate into writing. We have, AI now that can do that for you. That will save a lot of people time and money.
I'll just respond to the part about the historic resource assessment for a property that is not on the historic register. The city, based on evidence, can require a historic resource assessment to be performed under the new ordinance, but in that case, the city would be paying for the report. Only in the context of when a property is already on the historic register, would the property owner bear the burden of paying for the report.
It's not on the register. So I think that the register is not the only, there's like multiple ways for CEQA purposes to establish a historic resource, and the register is one of those. And so I don't know your specific circumstances, but it sounds like what you're saying is that you have a property not on the register, but that someone's alleging has historic elements to it. And so from a CEQA perspective, the city needs to evaluate the historic resource. And so what Jane is saying is that the code has a provision that says if the city has evidence of historic elements, that it can pay for a historic assessment. And so I'm not totally following what's going on with your property, but we can, if you want to contact us so that we can figure out what you're talking about, we can certainly try to resolve that. And as to your second point, sort of back to my prior comment about moving goalposts, we are trying, I feel for you. I think we all feel for you. That is not what we want to be happening, is moving goalposts. And part of our goal with our proposals on bringing forward changes to the code is to actually create sort of an easier path towards consistency so that both the public and the planners know how to implement the code by reading the code, and that it takes out a component of perhaps historic knowledge or some other piece that goes into the interpretation of it. And we don't want that. We want the code to be clear, whatever the goal of the code is. And it may be that what I'm hearing from all of these folks that have been working in town for so long is that there's a way to interpret it, and sometimes the code language isn't in line. And what we want to do is to bring the code language into alignment with what the intended purpose is, but it's causing this customer service like reverberation where because of that inconsistency from planner to planner and not knowing that background knowledge, you may be hearing different things. And so we want ultimately a code that is fair and transparent to everybody. And that is what the goal of this, the long-term process, the comprehensive zoning code update, and the shorter-term process of the sufficiency ordinance. That's really what is at least from our perspective, the underlying goal is to create that fairness and transparency for everyone.
We're coming up on 6 o'clock. I didn't want to leave anybody out, though.
Just one more. Hi, my name's Chris Davison. I'm a lifelong resident of Laguna. And I just provide a little bit of maybe a different perspective from an adjacent neighbor that went through design review. And through what I wanted to talk about was information loss that occurred after design review. And after my neighbor's design review completed, the intent of the DRB was not carried forward during later phases of the project, putting my family in harm's way during construction and allowing spa equipment revisions to negate any noise attenuation that the DRB had intended for us. Certainly anyone working on the project, including all contractors and city staff, should be aware of the conditions of approval. I would argue they should also be aware of other pertinent information discussed at the DR meetings regarding things like safety and noise. How can the city ensure critical design review information is properly compiled, distributed, understood, acknowledged, and retained by anyone working on the project, which in some cases may take years to complete? Thank you.
in terms of process, the goal is to have a clear process, and that's why we think it's important to have resolutions that demonstrate what the motion was and with clear conditions and the staff reports to back that up. And one of the things that's changed in the last year since at least I started as the city attorney was that we now have attorneys at Planning Commission and Design Review, so that if there are hiccups in a motion, for example, that there's someone to help correct it live at the meeting so that we don't have to, after the fact, try to fix it, which is a difficult thing to do because once the decision is final, it's hard to go back and fix it without modifications. And so certainly that is one of the priorities of the city attorney's office, is to create that fair process and to create better safeguards so that on a going forward basis, people know clearly what the project was, both from the neighbor's perspective and from the homeowner's perspective.
I wanted to thank everybody for being here, for your time especially. And this isn't the end of a conversation. Hopefully it's the beginning. Hopefully you have my email. If you don't, I wish I had a thought to do a sign-up sheet, but I'll make sure I try to push it out and then other people to push that out, because I'd love to hear further thoughts, whatever they are, whatever improvements you might make, code changes. We will have the code change dialogue and need to have that regularly with the user group of people who are most familiar with it, because I'm very respectful of the knowledge in this room and in the room a half an hour ago too. So thank you again. I really appreciate being here.